As tens of millions of Americans prepare to resume payments of their federal student loans in May, a small group of borrowers will soon see their debt canceled. Student loan servicing giant Navient said it would cancel $1.7 billion in private student debt for about 66,000 borrowers.
So this is a very big deal. It's one of the biggest sums of forgiveness, if not the biggest sum of forgiveness of this kind in the student loan space in years.
Navient reached a settlement with 39 state attorney generals to resolve claims that it engaged in deceptive and predatory lending practices. So, which student borrowers will be impacted by this settlement? And could it lead to future opportunities for loan forgiveness? Navient was once a part of the student loan giant Sallie Mae. Nearly all the canceled loans involved in the settlement originated at Sallie Mae from 2002 to 2010. At a time when student debt soared, on its way to becoming the second highest form of household credit after mortgages.
Credit was very loose, and anyone who wanted to get a loan, whether it was from the federal program or the private program, really didn't have trouble doing that.
The loans involved in the settlement primarily went to borrowers with poor credit and who attended schools with shaky records. This included many for-profit schools.
What Navient is accused of doing, back when it was part of Sallie Mae, is steering students into loans that were too high relative to what they could expect to earn once they left school, because the schools themselves just were not high quality schools.
Through our investigation, we learned that Navient specifically targeted students who they believed would struggle to pay those loans back.
States also accused Navient of pushing struggling borrowers further into debt by steering them into forbearance programs rather than enrolling them in low-cost repayment plans tied to their income. Forbearance programs allow borrowers to postpone payments but add more interest to the overall loan balance over time. As part of the settlement, Navient will pay $95 million to about 350,000 federal loan borrowers placed into certain forbearance programs, or about $260 each.
What Navient is accused of doing is basically saying, look, just go into forbearance and everything will be okay. And so essentially the loan turns into a form of quicksand, where you're already having trouble making the loan, interest accrues, and now it's becoming even harder and harder to pay off the loan.
All of the loans forgiven as part of the settlement were in default, and under the terms of the agreement, Navient did not admit to any liability or misconduct. Navient's chief legal officer said the company's decision to resolve these matters, which were based on unfounded claims, allows us to avoid the additional burden, expense, time, and distraction to prevail in court.
Navient is not admitting wrongdoing, and yet they are still agreeing to pay this amount of money to students who took out loans. They said, look, we are going to pay this, but we're only doing it because we don't want to go into an expensive court case.
Sallie Mae was not a defendant in the case. A spokesperson for the company said it has been a separate and independent company from Navient for nearly a decade, and they are not a party to the settlement. He added that Sallie Mae provides responsibly underwritten private student loans, and the vast majority of borrowers are effectively managing their payments. According to the settlement administrator's website, private borrowers who qualify for debt cancellation will be notified by July, and federal loan borrowers eligible for restitution should see payment by the middle of the year. The deal cancels student debt for nearly 66,000 people, which accounts for a fraction of the country's student loan borrowers. According to Education Department data, around 43 million Americans still owe $1.6 trillion in federal student loan debt. The settlement covers loans that are strictly private. They were not a part of the federal loan program. However, many of the borrowers affected by the settlement have both federal and private student loans.
If you're looking at the big picture of who has student debt, there's still a lot of student debt out there and a lot of people who before the pandemic were defaulting on their loans.
Still, the Navient settlement raises bigger questions about the federal student loan system as a whole.
If states are saying, look, Navient, you engaged in predatory lending by giving students these loans to go to these schools that were bad schools, then why wouldn't the same standard be held to the federal government? So what does that say about the Education Department federal student loan program? At some point, is the federal government going to confront that a lot of these loans are unrepayable? And if it does, what is it going to do about that?
Meanwhile, President Biden is facing increasing political pressure to fulfill his campaign promise of canceling $10,000 of debt per student borrower. Some lawmakers are even pushing him to cancel up to $50,000 per borrower, a move Biden says he opposes. Instead, the Biden administration has opted for a more targeted approach to student loan forgiveness by canceling debt for specific groups of borrowers, such as students who are defrauded by now defunct schools.
So while the Biden administration hasn't, tried to aggressively cancel student debt wholesale the way a lot of progressives want the administration to, it is looking at these different options.